Shalom. It is good to be with you. In our world, a world so loud with the clamor for success, we often look to the great figures of the past for a map. And few figures loom larger in our imagination than King Solomon. We are taught to admire his wisdom, to marvel at his wealth, the grand temple he built, a home for the divine on earth. But I am here today to ask a difficult question, a question that took me decades of my own painful experience to even know how to formulate. What if the greatest gift King Solomon possessed was also his most devastating curse? What if the very wisdom that elevated him above all others was the very force that sowed the seeds of his kingdom, his destruction, and his own personal despair? This is the hidden price of Solomon's wisdom, the story that isn't often told in Sunday school. It is a story about the profound and often tragic paradox of greatness. Have you ever met someone who seemed to have it all? I'm speaking of the kind of person whose mind works like a finely crafted watch, precise, brilliant, always 10 steps ahead. They build empires, they create innovations, they command respect. Yet, if you look closely, if you sit with them in a quiet moment, you might feel a profound emptiness radiating from them, a chill that their great success cannot seem to warm. This is the paradox I want to explore. Let me tell you about a man I knew. Let's call him Michael. Michael was a titan in the world of technology. He built a company from his garage into a global powerhouse, celebrated on the covers of magazines as a modern Solomon. His vision was his temple, a magnificent structure of code and commerce that would change the world. And to build it, he demanded everything, not just from himself, but from everyone around him. His employees worked grueling hours, a kind of modern forced labor, driven by the sheer power of his personality and the promise of a share in the glory. This is not so different from the mass, the system of conscripted labor Solomon used to build his grand projects. The texts tell us he conscripted 30,000 men from Israel, sending them to Lebanon in shifts. Imagine for a moment you are one of those men. You are a farmer, a father. But for 1 month out of every 3, you are taken from your land, from your family, and sent miles away to hew cedar trees for a palace you will never enter. The project is righteous. It is for God's glory. But your children are hungry. This is the first hidden cost. Great visions are often paid for with the small, quiet sacrifices of ordinary people. Michael's employees felt this. Their families felt it. The company thrived, but the people who built it were hollowed out. In your own pursuit of a great goal, a business, a career, a legacy, have you ever paused to truly calculate the cost being paid by those who support your vision? Is your temple being built on a foundation of quiet resentment? This leads to the second price, the heavy taxation required to sustain the glory. Solomon's court was legendarily opulent. His projects were vast, and all of it was funded by the people. The gold, the exotic materials, the food for his massive administration, it created a tax burden that was crushing. This is a subtle spiritual poison. It creates a chasm between the leader and the led. The people begin to see the grand vision not as their own, but as the leader's private obsession for which they are forced to pay. I saw this with Michael. To fund his company's relentless expansion, he didn't just demand his employees' time, he demanded their soul. Every decision was measured against the bottom line. The humanity of the enterprise was taxed away to pay for the glory of the stock price. It's a dangerous form of internal accounting, where we trade away our most precious, non-renewable resources, time, relationship, peace of mind, for something that glitters but has no real warmth. The wisdom of Maimonides teaches us about the golden path, the importance of balance in all things. Solomon's wisdom, in its application, became imbalanced. His ambition for the kingdom overshadowed his compassion for the individuals within it. The grandeur of the state became a burden upon the homes of its citizens. Ask yourself in your own life, What is the tax you are paying to maintain your current lifestyle or level of success? Is it your health, your connection to your spouse, your peace of mind? Finally, we come to the most insidious cost, the compromises that rot the foundation from within. The scripture tells us Solomon had 700 wives and 300 concubines, many of them foreign princesses, taken to seal political alliances. From a purely strategic, worldly perspective, this was brilliant. It created a network of treaties that ensured peace and prosperity. But our ancient wisdom is not merely about worldly strategy, it is about spiritual integrity. These alliances came with a condition. The foreign wives brought their own gods, their own rituals, and to keep the peace, Solomon built altars to these foreign deities, right there in the shadow of the temple he had built for the one God. He allowed the spiritual heart of his kingdom to be diluted. His great wisdom in statecraft led to a profound spiritual failure. He integrated so many different cultures into his life that he lost his own. I've seen this countless times in my work. A business owner, a good person, takes on an investor who doesn't share their core values. Or a talented individual joins a company whose ethics are questionable, telling themselves they can maintain their integrity. But the daily exposure, the constant small compromises, like building a small altar here and a small shrine there, eventually corrodes the soul. The brilliant alliance becomes a spiritual sickness. King Solomon, the wisest of men, made a deal with the world, and in the end, it nearly cost him his spiritual inheritance. The seeds of the civil war that would tear his kingdom apart after his death were sown right there, in those seemingly wise compromises. His wisdom was not wrong, it was incomplete. It was a worldly wisdom, untempered by the deeper understanding that some things cannot be compromised. Now we must turn from the external kingdom to the internal one, from the stone and cedar of the temple to the intricate and often dark corridors of the human psyche. For the price of Solomon's wisdom was not only paid by his people, but was extracted, minute by minute, from his own soul. This is perhaps the most tragic cost of all, the profound and unshakable loneliness of being the wisest man on earth. Imagine for a moment what it must have been like to be him, to sit in a council of advisors and already know the outcome of their week-long debate, to listen to a petitioner's plea and see with absolute clarity the tangled web of their life that led them to your throne and the future consequences of any judgment you might render. Who could he talk to? Who could offer him counsel? Who could possibly understand the weight of a mind that comprehended everything from the secrets of botany to the complexities of the human heart? There is a unique isolation that comes with profound insight. It is like being the only person in a room who can see in color while everyone else sees only in shades of gray. You try to describe the vibrant red of a sunset, and they just nod politely, seeing only a dull shape descending on the horizon. After a while, you might just stop trying. I am reminded of a brilliant woman I had the privilege of knowing many years ago, a physicist named Dr. Elena Rostova. She was a genius, a true prodigy whose work on quantum mechanics was decades ahead of its time. People lauded her. They gave her awards. They called her the wisest in her field. But I once sat with her at a dinner, and I watched her try to have a simple conversation with her own adult children. They spoke of their jobs, their vacations, the small, beautiful, ordinary things of life, and Elena tried to connect, but there was a gulf. Her mind, so accustomed to contemplating the fundamental nature of the universe, struggled to find purchase in the simple soil of everyday life. Her children loved her, but they were in awe of her. They couldn't see the woman behind the intellect. They saw the prize winner, the genius. They could not see the lonely mother who just wanted to be understood. This is the curse of the exceptional. Your gift becomes a wall, separating you from the very people you long to connect with. Have you ever felt that? That your own knowledge or success has created a distance between you and those you love, an invisible barrier they can't cross and you don't know how to dismantle? This crushing loneliness, This existential isolation is the key to understanding Solomon's most enigmatic and haunting work, the Book of Ecclesiastes, or Kohelet. The book begins with one of the most devastating pronouncements in all of literature. Havel Havalim, Amar Kohelet, Havel Havalim, Hakol Havel. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. For centuries, people have read this as a cry of depression, of nihilism. But I believe it is something far deeper. It is the final, logical conclusion of a wisdom that is purely intellectual. It is the cry of a mind that has seen too much. When you can see the end of every project from its beginning, the decay hidden in every beautiful thing, the forgetting that follows every great achievement, what is there to strive for? Solomon's wisdom became a burden because it stripped the world of its mystery and its illusions. He saw the cycles of nature, the rising and setting of the sun, the predictability of human folly, and he realized that on a long enough timeline, all our frantic building, our chasing of wealth and pleasure, our pursuit of even wisdom itself amounts to nothing more than chasing the wind. This is the point where a blessing becomes a burden. The ability to see the whole picture is a gift, but it can rob you of the ability to enjoy the single brushstroke. The knowledge of the ultimate destination can make you impatient with the journey. Think of it in your own life. Have you ever been so focused on the 10-year plan that you failed to enjoy a simple, perfect Tuesday? Have you ever been so aware of the potential problems in a relationship that you couldn't give yourself over to the simple joy of the moment? This was Solomon's crisis, magnified 1,000-fold. His wisdom was a relentless engine of deconstruction. It showed him the futility of it all. And this is not depression. In the clinical sense, it is a spiritual crisis. It's the dark night of the soul that comes when the intellect, our greatest tool, reveals its own limitations. It can analyze the world, it can build kingdoms, it can write proverbs, but it cannot provide a lasting sense of meaning. This is the terrifying void that Solomon, the wisest of all men, found himself staring into at the peak of his power. And it is a void that many of us, in our own smaller ways, come to face when our own successes feel hollow. Up to now, we have examined the king in his palace and the sage in his study. We have walked the lonely halls of a mind burdened by its own brilliance. But wisdom, true wisdom, is not found only in palaces or books. It is found in the soil, in the workshop, in the kitchen. And so now, we must leave the throne room and walk out into the dusty streets of ancient Jerusalem. We must ask a question that history, which is so often written by the victors and the powerful, rarely dares to ask. What was the price of Solomon's wisdom for the ordinary person? What did the grand vision look like from the ground up? Because a project is only truly righteous if it elevates not just the leader, but the people it purports to serve. A kingdom is only truly wealthy if its citizens feel a sense of abundance in their own lives, not just in the king's treasury. Let me share a story from a world you might recognize. I once worked with a company whose CEO was a visionary, a man widely seen as a corporate Solomon. He decided the company needed a new headquarters, a magnificent glass tower in the heart of the city, a modern-day temple to their success. It was a stunning project that won architectural awards and was featured in business journals. To the outside world, it was a symbol of incredible success. But I was there to speak with the employees, the people who actually made the company run. I spoke to a man named David, a mid-level manager who had been with the company for 20 years. He told me, "Solomon, we see the pictures of the new building, but what we experience are the budget cuts to our department. We hear the speeches about our glorious future, but what we see are wage freezes. They are building this monument with stones taken from the foundations of our own departments." His team, once a proud and motivated group, now felt like mere resources, conscripted to serve a vision they had no part in and from which they derived no real benefit. The grand project for them was a symbol not of success, but of disconnection. Does this sound familiar? Have you ever been part of a grand initiative at work or in your community that looked wonderful on paper but felt like a drain on your life and resources? This is precisely the story of Solomon's kingdom from the people's perspective. Imagine you are a farmer in the northern tribe of Ephraim. For generations, your family has lived by the rhythm of the seasons, loyal to your clan and your local elders. Now, under Solomon, things have changed. The kingdom has been carved into 12 new administrative districts, ignoring the old tribal boundaries. A governor, a stranger from Jerusalem, now oversees your life. A tax collector, with the full authority of the king, arrives to take a significant portion of your grain and your oil to feed a vast, bloated bureaucracy in a city that feels a world away. And then comes the labor conscription. Your eldest son is taken for months at a time to work in a quarry or a forest for a project whose glory feels distant and abstract. You hear that the temple is a house for God, and a part of you feels pride. But another, more private part of you feels the sharp sting of injustice. The spiritual and social price of the temple was that, for many, it shifted their relationship with God from something personal and local into something centralized, state-controlled, and deeply expensive. The life of the average citizen was fundamentally altered. Before, wealth was in the land, in the flock, in the family. Under Solomon, wealth became something that was extracted and moved to the capital. This centralization of power and wealth created a new social structure. It created a permanent ruling class and a permanent service class. While the Musar tradition teaches us the virtue of empathy, of placing ourselves in the shoes of another, Solomon's statecraft seemed to do the opposite. It created a system where it became harder and harder for the king in his golden palace to understand the life of the farmer in his simple stone house. How do we measure the true worth of a magnificent achievement? Is it by the height of its towers, or by the well-being of the people who live in its shadow? Solomon's wisdom built a glorious kingdom, but it failed to build a contented one. The deep resentments that festered during his reign were not a minor side effect of his policies, they were the direct result. This is why, the very moment he died, the kingdom ripped itself in two. The people's perspective was not just an opinion, it was a prophecy of the coming division. It is one thing to analyze the past, to dissect the mistakes of a king who lived 3,000 years ago. It is another, far more difficult thing to apply those lessons to the mirror. Because the story of Solomon is not just a historical account, it is a timeless archetype of the human condition. We all have a small kingdom to rule. A business, a family, a career, our own inner world, and we all seek wisdom to rule it well. So the crucial question becomes, how do we pursue the gifts of wisdom and success without succumbing to the curses that so often accompany them? How do we build our own temples without bankrupting our souls and alienating the people we love? The path is not to reject ambition or to fear wisdom, but to cultivate the safeguards that Solomon, in his brilliance, seemed to neglect. The first safeguard is to intentionally seek out the dissenting voice. Solomon was the wisest man in the world who could possibly give him advice? This was his trap. He was surrounded by counselors, but one wonders if any of them dared to truly challenge him. In our own lives, success can build a similar bubble. As we become more successful, people are more likely to agree with us, to flatter us, to tell us what we want to hear. The most vital practice for any leader, for any seeker of wisdom, is to create a personal council of the dissenter. This is a person, or a small group of people, whom you have explicitly given permission to tell you the hard truth, to challenge your assumptions, to be the one voice in the room that says, "I disagree." In the Jewish tradition, the virtue of humility, anava, is not about thinking less of yourself, but about thinking of yourself less. It is about recognizing that your perspective is inherently limited and that truth is often found in the tension between opposing viewpoints. I worked with a young CEO, a brilliant woman named Rebecca, who was on the verge of making a disastrous acquisition. Her entire executive team was behind her, caught up in her visionary zeal. But she had a mentor, an old professor, who served as her counsel of the Dissenter. He was the one who asked the uncomfortable questions, who pointed out the flaws in her logic, not to diminish her, but to save her from her own blind spots. Who in your life has permission to tell you that your great idea is a mistake? If the answer is no one, you are in a very dangerous place. The second safeguard is what I call the empathy tithe. A tithe, in ancient tradition, was giving a tenth of your harvest back to the community, back to God. The empathy tithe is the practice of dedicating a tenth of your time and mental energy not to your grand vision, but to the small lived realities of the people in your kingdom. Solomon became disconnected from the farmer, the quarry worker. The modern leader can just as easily become disconnected from the junior employee, the customer service representative, the spouse who is managing the household. The practice is simple but profound. Once a week, intentionally step out of the throne room. If you're a CEO, spend an hour listening to customer service calls. If you're a manager, take an employee from a different department to lunch and just listen to their story. If you are the primary breadwinner, dedicate an evening to understanding the invisible labor your partner performs to keep your home life running. This is an act of rachamim, of deep compassion. It reframes your people not as resources to be managed for your vision, but as human beings whose well-being is the vision. When you make your next big decision, how will you actively seek to understand its impact on the quietest, most junior person in your organization? The final, and perhaps most crucial safeguard, is to define enough. Solomon's ambition seems to have been boundless. One project led to the next, one acquisition of wealth and wives to the next, until the entire enterprise became a frantic chasing of the wind, as he himself would later write. The antidote to this is the Kabbalistic concept of gevurah, which means strength, discipline, or setting boundaries. Unchecked ambition is like a river without banks. It has great power, but it creates floods and destruction. The discipline of gevurah is what digs the riverbanks, creating a channel through which that powerful energy can flow productively and safely. The most practical way to do this is to sit down in a quiet moment, long before you reach your ultimate goal, and write down your definition of enough. How much money is enough for a life of security and generosity? How much recognition is enough to feel valued? How big does your company need to be to fulfill its mission? Without a clear, predefined finish line, you will run yourself and everyone around you into the ground. Your wisdom must be strong enough to tell your ambition, this far and no further. This is not an act of limitation, it is the ultimate act of liberation. We have walked a long and sometimes shadowed path together today. We have stood on the ramparts of Solomon's kingdom and seen the cracks in its foundation. We have sat with him in the lonely throne room of his mind and heard his soul's cry of despair. We have listened to the unheard voices of his people. The picture that emerges is not one of a simple failure, but of a profound and tragic lesson. Wisdom, like wealth or power, is a magnificent force. It can build wonders, but unchecked by humility, untempered by empathy, and unbounded by a clear sense of purpose, it becomes a consuming fire. It will burn through your relationships, hollow out your own soul, and leave the kingdom you worked so hard to build in ashes. The great irony is that the wisest man in the world failed to grasp the most important form of wisdom. In the mystical tradition of my heritage, we distinguish between two primary forms of wisdom. There is choshmah, which is the brilliant, expansive flash of insight. It is raw knowledge, the grasping of a new idea, the seeing of all the disparate facts. It is the wisdom of the intellect, of the strategist, of the grand architect. This was Solomon's domain. He had more choshmah than any person alive. But then there is binah. Binah is understanding, connection, and development. If choshmah is the seed, binah is the soil that allows it to grow. It is the ability to take that raw insight and weave it into the complex fabric of human relationships, to understand its consequences, to feel its impact on others. It is the wisdom of the heart. The entire tragedy of Solomon can be understood as an excess of chochmah and a deficit of binah. His intellect outran his empathy. His grand vision blinded him to the small realities of his people. He understood everything except the one thing that mattered most, that a kingdom, a business, a family is not a structure of stone and gold, but a delicate web of human hearts. The temple he should have been building was not on a mountaintop, but in the connections between himself and his people. I want to return for a moment to Michael, the brilliant technology CEO I spoke of earlier, our modern Solomon. For years, he ran his company on pure chochmah. He was a master of strategy, data, and vision. But just like Solomon, his kingdom began to crack. His best people started leaving, his own health failed, and he found himself in that same lonely room, staring at his success and feeling nothing but a profound emptiness. His vanity of vanities moment. It was only after this crisis, this stripping away of the illusion, that he began the hard work of cultivating Bina. He began to listen. He started the practice of the empathy tithe, spending time every week with the most junior employees, not to talk, but to understand. He hired a coach who became his counsel of the Dissenter, someone whose only job was to challenge his brilliant assumptions. And he did the hardest thing of all. He sat down and defined enough, shifting the company's focus from relentless growth to sustainable, humane excellence. He did not become less wise. He became more so because his brilliant chochmah was now grounded in the deep, compassionate soil of Binah. And so we are left with ourselves. The safeguards we have discussed, seeking the Dissenter, practicing empathy, defining enough, these are not just good leadership tips. They are the practical exercises for transforming your own wisdom. They are the tools by which you build the banks of the river to channel your ambition. They are how you ensure that your knowledge leads not to isolation, but to connection, not to burnout, but to genuine abundance. I invite you now, in the quiet that follows these words, to ask yourself the final, most important question. Look at the kingdom of your life, your work, your family, your goals, and ask with gentle but unflinching honesty, where is my wisdom costing me more than I realize? Where is my ambition creating attacks on the people I love? What magnificent temple am I building? And is its foundation made of joy and connection, or is it resting on the quiet sacrifices and unspoken resentments of others? This self-reflection is the beginning of true wisdom. It is the beginning of building a kingdom that will last.